Hi, this is Adam Stofsky with Briefly, and I'm here with Jennifer Schinke for our Inland Counties Legal Services video series. And today we're going to talk about a topic that, well, all of us can relate to is taxes. And what happens if you owe the IRS or the IRS says you owe them money, back taxes? What are your legal and financial options? Because you might have some. So Jennifer, why don't you just kind of give us the overview? How does this tend to come about? Like, how do people end up owing money or allegedly owing money to the IRS?
Well, there's lots of different ways that the taxes are assessed and points in time that they are assessed. First of all, you just file a return and you owe money. I mean, either you are self-employed and didn't pay an estimated, or there wasn't enough estimated to pay because it was just an estimate, or the withholdings from the employer weren't enough, or there's a lot of other situations too. Those are just the most common. And you just owe the IRS. And then you got to figure out, well, I can't afford to pay this bill. How do I pay it? Another situation is just that the IRS, you turn in your return and the IRS reassesses something, changes something, and you end up owing them. And that's when a lot of times the notices come into effect, and that's when you find out about those. And a big um, thing that I would say is that if you get an IRS notice, don't ignore it. First things first, respond ASAP, because the sooner you respond or the sooner you try to figure out how to pay a debt, the easier it is to deal with.
Right. I know it's scary to get. I mean, I've run small businesses. I run a business now, and it's like pretty scary when you get the. You don't want to open the IRS letter because you think it's going to be bad news, right? But it's really important to open it.
Oh yeah, people think, oh, if I don't open it, it'll just go away,
Yeah,
and
that's
it just gets worse.
yeah, they won't forget about you. So in terms of like, so for some context, like I'm thinking about this as like, because I've seen a lot of small business owners kind of always work like a regular job, and then suddenly they don't really realize they have to withhold their own taxes, or if they just become self-employed. But this can be any self-employed job where the employer is reporting the income, right? Do you see that as a common situation where this can happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, because when you're self-employed, you don't just owe the taxes on the money, you owe the self-employment tax on it as well. And that's a lot of times where that does come in, because the self-employment tax, which is basically your Medicare and Social Security portions of the tax that your employer usually deals with on your withholdings when you have a regular job, you have to deal with it when you're self-employed.
So let's talk about that notice you get. So what is usually, if there is a debt owed or allegedly a debt owed, what are you looking for in that notice?
So, a lot of the notice, it depends on where the status is. So, if you filed a return and you know you owe and you know why, it's you gotta be just a notice reminding you that you owe, because you told them you owe this money, you filed a return, you told them you owe the money, so they just send a notice reminding you, "Oh, you haven't paid us." If they've made changes, those are really important notices for you to look at, or any tax professional helping you to look at, because if they made changes, those are the notices that are gonna explain why they made the changes. Did you leave off some 1099 or W-2 or some kind of income stream that a third party sent to the IRS, which is the most common reason that there's those changes? Or did if you're self-employed, which is what we're talking about a lot today, seem to be anyway, that we are they denying expenses? Are they denying other things
Oh,
on
like
the schedule?
business expenses, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just it'll explain why they're making those changes and what those changes are. So it's really important to start there, especially if it's an out of the blue one, because you want to know why they're making the changes, because then you can see, can I fight this, or do I just owe it and have to deal with the collection process?
Right. Right. So the notice isn't like a lawsuit. It's just them telling you, "Hey, we think you owe this. You have X amount of time to pay," basically, right?
Right. We're saying you owe us this, and you need to pay, respond, however, depending on where you are in the process. The initial ones, when they're making the changes, will ask you to agree or to send things responding to it if you disagree. And then later on, once you get past the points where they're going to let you do that, it's just a collection notice saying,
Pay
pay
us,
us
pay
here.
up, right? So what is like the clock on that? What's the timeline? You get that notice and they say, "Oh, you owe us money. Is there like a standard timeline for how much time you have to contest the expenses or to pay?
There's really not like a standard. It's just whatever the note, especially with the ones that say reply or respond, and gives you a chance to fight the amounts. Those timelines definitely you want to make sure you're looking at those and responding because a lot of times those come with appeal rights and other rights, which again is why my recommendation is to always look at those notices as soon as you can so that you know when those dates are and can respond fully. But it'll be the date on the notice. There's not really a standard time frame, I would say.
Got it. Okay. But I'm assuming by continuing to engage, you can sort of if it says we're paying 30 days or 60 days, I'm assuming there are ways to get more time. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So if you respond to them, then that time frame kind of goes away a little bit. I mean, depending on so you call them, you get into you go, hey, can you call collections for a certain amount of time so we can figure this out? That some depending on the situation, they will. To be at how many notices they've already sent, what notice number are you on? They may be look more or less willing to work with you. Again, that's why the sooner the better.
Right.
Uh, and after a while, especially with the ones where they reassessed it and it's not from the original return, you really want to make sure you're following their timelines because at some point they're going to send you a notice of deficiency, which is what we call it the ticket to tax court. You have to get one of those to go to tax court. And so you want to make sure you know when you get that one because that is there are timelines on these notices of things like that, and they're not as stringent in taxes in some other areas of the law. Not that you shouldn't care about the dates, but they're not as stringent. But with that notice of deficiency and going to tax court, that is deadlock deadline.
Okay.
There are very few ways to get out of that 90-day deadline on that notice of
The
deficiency.
notice of deficiency, that's the one that's like, all right, this is kind of the end of the road. You're going to court, basically.
Well, that's like your last ditch to get to fight it.
Right.
After that, they're just going to keep sending collection notices and assess your file.
Okay.
Because until then, they haven't assessed your IRS file even.
Eh,
But once you get that notice of deficiency, that's when they do it.
I'm guessing there's like three different scenarios. One is like you owe it and you can pay it and you just pay it.
Right,
Or
exactly.
two is you do really owe the money, but you just really can't afford that bill. Maybe in that situation where you forgot to withhold taxes, you have been planning around it. And the third is you actually disagree with what the IRS said. Are those does that encompass all the major scenarios?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, to me, there's yeah, I mean, there's two, and one of them has two lines after it because it's like I obviously owe it is the one, and then the two ways are either pay it or deal with collections and try to make arrangements. And then the other one is I disagree, and then there's different avenues depending on where you are in the process.
So let's start with you agree you do owe this money, but you just can't afford to pay it or can't afford to pay it right now.
So we have what we call three collection alternatives when you have a tax bill that you can't afford to pay. There is currently non-collectible status, installment agreements, and offers and compromises.
You want to go through them one by one?
Yeah, of course. So the currently non-collectible status is not really one of my favorites, but it's a temporary status where you tell the IRS, look, right now my situation is I can't pay you anything. And can we just hold collections? I don't even make enough for you to garnish my wages or I'm going to be in a really bad spot and not pay my bills, pay my rent. So can we just halt collections? And if you're accepted into that, they do halt them for a period of time, usually 6 months to a year. And then you have to be reevaluated to determine whether you can stay in that status. And what you're doing there is you're basically needing to prove to them that you have no way of paying them. So they're going to want your financial, what we call a 433F, which is a financial form that you're going to have to fill out that outlines your bank accounts, your assets, your money, your expenses, showing them that there's nothing there. And then at that point, like we said, at that point, it halts collections, but it is still on the books until it's written off at the 10-year statute of limitations. Um, and it still accrues interest. So if you're very early on in the process, like it's 2024 and it's a 2022 debt, tax debt, you're going to have almost a decade, if not a decade, before the statute of limitations is up. And then, if you can't get into currently non-collectible, there's also the options of installment agreements, which are basically a payment plan that you will be in effect until the amount is fully paid or the statute of limitations runs, whichever comes first. There's two types of those agreements. There's full pay installment agreements and partial pay installment agreements. Uh, full pay full pay installment agreements are
It's
agreements
a bit of a
where
tongue twister. Full pay.
the IRS will get fully paid before the statute of limitations runs based on the amount you're paying every month. And that's why we call it a fully paid. And so by that definition, partial pay is when they won't get fully paid. But they realize that's all you can pay. They look at your finances and say you can't pay more than that. And so we agree to it. Partial, they're going to want a 433F like we discussed with the currently non-collectible, where they're going to review and make sure that's all you can pay. Then there's the offers and compromises, which is where you settled the debt for less than what you owe. You offered to compromise the debt or settle the debt for less than what you owe, usually quite a bit less, hopefully. And usually that's in a lump sum payment. Sometimes they will accept payment plans for a very short period of time, maybe a year or two.
Oh, you make 4 payments a quarter.
Yeah,
One
like a
quarter.
small amount.
Yeah.
Exactly. With offers and compromises, they don't like to go out too far with the payments. And basically, that wipes the debt clean once you've paid the agreed balance, just like it does with credit cards and other things where you made those kind of agreements. And then then it's off the books. It's not accruing interest, nothing like that. And then but you do have to keep in mind that you do have to stay in compliance with the IRS for the next 5 years after that. So if for any reason you don't file on time, pay on time, do estimated taxes on time, pay estimated taxes on time, anything to do with the IRS on time, they can completely dissolve the agreement. And it goes back on the books with interest for however long. It could be your 4.5 and you mess up, and it goes back with interest for 4 years.
Right. So, definitely get an accountant and stay on the ball with your accountant.
Exactly.
Yeah, before you go, because you just said a lot of interesting things. So it sounds like actually there's a lot of options. Like the news is actually I'm not say the news is good. It's bad to owe taxes, but actually, there are options for installment plans that you can afford, some where you pay the whole tax debt, others where you might not. There's options to negotiate a lump sum or just a small set of installments to just pay less than you owe.
Exactly. There's so many options. I mean, sometimes depending on what option you're wanting, you had to fight a little. Offers, you may have to battle with them on the amount, things like that. But there's so many options out there.
Okay, then given that, what are the options for help?
So I mentioned VITA. VITA, they file tax returns. They are a free tax preparation service. They just file returns. That's all they do. And then a local taxpayer clinic, which there are many, there's one in almost every state. I can't say every state. There's at least one in almost every state. And what we do is basically, I like to joke that it's everything beyond filing the tax return. It's you filed a tax return and they don't want to let you have your dependent. Help you with that. I owe taxes and I don't. Collections is what I call our bread and butter. We do a lot of collections work. We go and then of course an LITC can go all the way to representing you in tax court. If it comes to that, either representing you in the appeals processes within the IRS, tax court outside the IRS. So I'd like to joke it's basically everything issues you're having with them beyond the filing.
And how much does that cost the client? Is that free to the client?
Our services are free of charge, though. For those who qualify, there are income qualifications to qualify for our services. But if you qualify for our services, any services you receive from us are free of charge.
Okay, that is great. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I guess the message we should leave viewers with, if there's any one message, it's like open those letters from the IRS, right?
Yes, open those letters, because the sooner you get involved in the process, the more options you have.
Jennifer, thank you so much.
Thank you.